Hallelujah. You can do better than that. Give Abba the praise. Hallelujah. My goodness, I tell you, this is some of the most exciting times that I've, in my extended lifetime, being able to see what Abba has planned for us over the course of the last 40 years, and then being able to watch some of it come to fruition. And here we are living in a season where there is such an air of excitement, at least among those that are hearing what Abba is speaking to us. For 30-something years now, we've been in the Hebrew Roots movement, and we've been watching what is taking place and listening, doing our best to be as obedient to Father as we can, hearing His Word, some powerful revelation like I have never seen before, and I am so grateful. I stand before you guys, I stand before Him humbled and awestricken at the same time, knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt that the things that He's revealing in the Word, that there's absolutely no way that we could just cherry pick them ourselves and present them in some kind of a compilation and say, here's a word from Abba, without it being a direct word from the Ruach HaKodesh. And so I praise Him for that. And this Torah portion this week has been mind-staggering, in particular as it leads us into the season, as Shepherd John was just sharing with us, of Purim. And it's interesting because if you're like us, let me just share this. I appreciate the revelation of His Word. I appreciate what He has been sharing with us, and I can't really even begin to, and I'm a wordsmith, but I cannot really express how much I appreciate what He's been sharing. But on the other hand, I know that we have been approaching very quickly a line of demarcation, and we're about to step over that line. Not only have we been privileged with the revelation of Abba's Word, we are now on the cusp of beginning to see a supernatural demonstration of that power that will accompany the revelation as well. We're about to see Abba collectively unite His body across the earth, and as that body begins to stand up, the body's going to form the man called Yeshua HaMashiach. And we're going to see some tremendous, Daniel said this, they that do know Him shall do great exploits. And I'm expecting that. And I believe that we're going to start seeing, as I said, the supernatural manifest itself not only in the congregation, but be a calling card that you can deposit in the life of other individuals who may be suffering for whatever particular malady or infirmity or deformity or infirmity or whatever they may be going through. And it will cause them to see the manifestation of the Creator in their lives like never before. On the other hand, there's going to be great opposition like the world has never seen. Most of the people that I know are focusing on that. They're focusing on what's called tribulation and megathlipsis, great tribulation. And I believe that out of the furnace of great tribulation is going to step out a being whose body will not be touched by the fire or not even have the stench of the smoke on it. And that body's going to stand up. And that body is going to be the force that must be reckoned with by the powers that be in the earth. And I'm telling you, the church as we know it is not going to be a weak and frail institution. We are going to step into the kingdom, the warriors, the overcomers that we have been called to be, and there will be no hide, hair, nor hoof left in Egypt. Can you say amen? And that's why if you will look at this Torah portion with me, you're going to see some things. I'm just going to challenge you. Don't take my word for it. Do what 2 Timothy 2:15, study to show yourself approved unto Yahweh, a workman that will not be ashamed by rightly dividing the word of truth. I promise you, you're going to see some things in this particular study that you've not seen before, and prayerfully it will challenge you to step out of your structured religious box and begin to see with an earnest expectation what Abba has planned for you. And don't settle for the crumbs. We've got to stop that. We've got to stop enlarging our expectation, thinking outside the box and thinking generationally, knowing that we are the instrument that Yahweh, we're the catalyst that Yahweh is using to launch this next stage that's on the horizon right now. I believe that with everything in me. This Torah portion, Tetzaveh, bears a unique connection to what we're about to look at this coming week with the study of Esther and Purim. Tetzaveh launches us into the season when most of the church world of Hebrew roots movement and most of our Jewish brothers celebrate the Festival of Purim. And I believe with all my heart that what's happened is become more of a fleshly, carnal thing, and most people don't really understand the innuendo that has been embedded into the study of the Purim in the book of Esther and what Abba's trying to show us regarding where we are right now. Okay? And so we're going to look at some things that bear scrutiny in this study of Tetzaveh and the festival known as Purim, and you're going to see that they are so intertwined that it has to be the hand of Yahweh that has linked these two together. And if you study it, you'll find that this Parsha, Tetzaveh, beginning all the way back in the book of Exodus until the end of the Torah in Deuteronomy, it's the only place where Moshe's name is not mentioned. It's as if Moshe is absent from the scene. Just like in our study of Purim in the book of Esther, most scholars say Yahweh himself is absent. He's not mentioned in that particular scroll. And it's interesting because if you study the life of Moshe, Moshe was born during this month called Adar on the 7th of Adar, and according to the sages, died exactly 120 years later on the same day, just prior to the date known later as Purim. And there are a lot of other interesting connections between Tetzaveh and the book of Esther. In particular, this Parsha, Tetzaveh, deals specifically, and Brittany did a marvelous segue into the teaching this week because she was talking about some of the same things that we're looking at. And this particular Parsha deals specifically with priestly garments and the temple rituals that's related to those garments. And it's also interesting because if you study the book of Esther, it initially launches us into a great party or a celebration that the king of Persia is celebrating. He has 127 of his provinces gathered together. And if you know the history behind that, he is actually celebrating the fact that the house of Israel had missed or misinterpreted the calendar, and so instead of getting out of slavery, they're still in bondage for a season. And he's celebrating, making a mockery, if you will, of the God of Israel by throwing this lavish party with all of its indulgences, and he is himself clothed with the priestly garments, and the vestments that were sacred to the house of Israel are what is being used to celebrate that party. And it's a very sacrilegious thing. And it's interesting because you go back and look at how the king is mockingly taking advantage of the children of Israel in this particular Parsha. And in the book of Esther, it's interesting because what most people don't understand is that there is a parallel to the day that you and I are living in as we speak. Now, there's another thing spoken of in Tetzaveh, and it goes along with the priestly garments. And it's a mechanism that was used by the priest, and some people call it divination. I don't like that word because it's connected by most people's mindset with an occult realm. But most people believe that the Urim and Thummim, how many of you have ever heard of Urim and Thummim, the stones that were inside the breastplate pouch? Well, it's interesting because most people believe that the Urim and Thummim were actually a set of lots. And if you've ever, how many of you have ever played some of these card games where you have a set of dice and you have different numbers on the dice and you throw the dice and it determines how many moves you make on the board? But most people believe that the Urim and Thummim were similar to that they were black and a white stone, probably with a yes or a no, depending on which the color represented either. And it was a method for getting a very simple answer from Yahweh when you cast those lots. You got a yes or a no answer, okay? And it's interesting because in this study of Purim, you find Haman also lends himself to the casting of lots as he determines when the house of Israel is going to be murdered and massacred, if you will. And so what I want to do is stop just for a second and look at a couple of key words, the word Purim, and then we look at the word Urim. Notice the connection, the sound there. The word Purim is the singular word for the singular form for the word lot, or a piece, And it is a supposed Persian word, but it's also identified in the same text here in the Hebrew language as goral, which means lots of pebble or a stone. Really simple. I contend it's far more than that. Okay? The word for Urim here is also from a very closely related, if you can go back and look, it has the Vav Resh root just like Purim does. And Urim is defined as lights, and it's taken from the root of the word flame or also light. And if you can read Hebrew, you know that the Aleph in Urim has no sound. And so the vowel point is stressed on the Vav, giving us a U sound, as in Purim. That's where you get Purim. And then you have to also understand that the word Purim is styled with the letter Pei. Now pay attention to that letter. That was not intention. Pay attention to Pei, because it's the Hebrew letter that indicates mouth, something that is breathed out. My mouth is an opening here that exudes the breath or the word that is released out of this spirit man. Now, hidden inside the Hebrew letter Pei is an additional Hebrew letter, and it's the Hebrew letter Beit, indicating house. And so it would seem then, when I look at the Hebrew letter Pei that begins the word Purim, as in a casting of lots, that there's something regarding what issues forth out of my mouth that's going to affect the house, and regarding the decision that's being rendered when those lots are cast. Does that make sense to you? And so when you see here in Esther, those Purim or lots are cast or released or consulted, it seems as if then, if Haman is the one that's using them as an instrument when he casts those lots, it seems as if whatever is determined by the casting of those lots, that instead of affecting the house of Israel, it's going to affect his own house instead. Isn't that interesting? Israel was designated for annihilation, and you find out the house of Haman is destroyed instead. And this is where, again, we want to emphasize the importance of the Hebrew letter Pei as representing the mouth, specifically here, the mouth of Yahweh. As I said, the Pei contains the letter Beit, the house or the bride, and so you find the first word of Torah is the word Bereshit. It begins literally with us seeing the mouth of Elohim, where you find the release of the breath of Yahweh out of his mouth. It's actually indicating the release of his plans for his bride or his house. And so when you see the first word in Torah, Bereshit, it's actually beginning the release, if you will, of the speaking of his house. In other words, when Yahweh speaks first there in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, he is literally speaking his house into existence, and everything that's happening right now where you are concerning you, even though you feel sometimes as if you've been left to the side, kicked to the curb, he's not interested in you, he doesn't really know where you're at. He understands if you're part of his house. When he first spoke Bereshit, he was speaking you in the situation you are, and he had already determined a destiny for you, and it's written right here in Genesis chapter 1. All you have to do is to reconcile yourself with his plans. Now, keeping that in mind, it's my opinion that this king of Persia, not only did he use those stolen garments and the vessels of Israel's priesthood, but you find while he's doing this, he's flaunting in the face of Israel a scornful rejection, not only of the religion of Israel, but the God of Israel. And in scorning, making fun of, literally clothing himself in a mocking way with the garments of the priest, it would have also involved, because the Urim and Thummim were part of the garments, they were inside the garments, and so I'm contending before you today that he would have also been mocking the Urim and Thummim, and I believe that instead of us thinking of dice being cast or two stones saying yes or no that Haman had, Haman was actually in possession of the Urim and Thummim that belonged to the priests of Israel, and he's using this as a mechanism to determine the fate of the house of Yahweh. but he has no clue that the fate of Abba's house from the inception of creation, when he spoke the word Bereshit into creation itself, that the destiny of his house had already been foreordained before the foundation of the world, and nothing Haman could do, nothing the powers that be that are existing today can do, will change the plans of Yahweh. So we have to ask ourselves what's going on here. I like to kind of put myself in the shoes, if you will, of those that are there during this story. And so I ask myself, what is this king Ahasuerus, whatever his name in Persia would be, and specifically Haman, why did they want control of the garments and the Urim and Thummim? Especially, now, this is based on what a lot of scholars think about the Urim and Thummim, especially if those stones were just simply two stones, one white, one black, with yes or no written on. Why would I want to take control of that? And what effect could I take and use that against the people of Yahweh and just kind of say, well, you know, we're going to probably destroy them. And so I'll throw these lots and it rolls up yes or no. And it seems almost as if it's an asinine thing for me to think that they were just that simple-minded. Are you listening to me? I believe that these two specific instruments, the Urim and Thummim, were far more powerful and way beyond our current comprehension. And I'm also contending that the Persians, having taken Israel and the custody of Israel out of Babylon, that they also, along with the Babylonians, had insight regarding these priestly garments and the power resonating in them and the other vessels as well. Now, I want to stop here, and I'm going to connect you to where we are right now today. In our story, you need to remember that Israel had been held captive in Babylon. Everybody remembers that. Babylon had used the sweat equity of Israel as the means of securing Babylon's debt or economy. Later, go back and read the book of Daniel. Daniel prophesies the end of Babylon and the coming of the Persian kingdom. And so Persia conquers Babylon, and what does Persia do? Persia takes the chattel, if you will, called Israel, and brings Israel by conquest underneath their umbrella or their covering, and they then use the sweat equity of Israel just as Babylon did to secure their debt and their economy. Does that make sense? Well, that's the same parallel we have today. In our Parsha, as a result of war, Israel is seen as a slave by the Persian kingdom. And based on that mindset, they are considered, listen to me carefully, because this is very applicable to where every one of you, those of you that are tuned in today, it's not an accident, because you are a slave. You're considered a slave as a result of war. Well, wait a minute, we're not in war. I beg to differ. And since they're at war, and since they are slaves, they're owned, they're considered incapable of maintaining any sort of inheritance and must have someone take care of them, and therefore the state, known as Persia, fast forward to our day, the state becomes the guardian and creates a fictitious entity, an artificial intelligence, and I have in my notes, pay attention, watch this, an AI called a straw man. Well, the method of operation from that time unto this has not changed, only the circumstances and the players have changed. And so if you fast forward to our day, rather than creating a fictitious instrument, listen to me, every facet of your life is affected by fictitious instruments. If you will look in your wallet or your purse, you could probably extract something like a driver's license or a Social Security card or a bank card, anything that has your quote-unquote name on it, and if it's in an all-caps construct, then that's indicative of a straw man, an artificial intelligence that's been created to represent you, who the state considers a slave, also known as a dead man. Okay? And so what's happened now, is that the slaves are beginning to wake up. Turn to your neighbor and tell them, I am really woke. Not the woke generation that's on the liberal left side. They don't have a clue. I'm awake. And as we're awakening, listen to me, what we're discovering is actually exposing the magic behind the powers that be. And just like in this story of Esther, listen to me, remember the story starts out in a party. They're celebrating, and as they're celebrating, they're making a mockery because they believed that Israel had missed their calculations regarding the end of their captivity. Are you listening to me? Israel knew when their captivity was going to end. Here we are. We're the outcasts of Israel. How many of you know when your captivity is about to end? We talk about the outcasts being gathered. Come on now, just do you know? Give me a time and a date. Come on, Messianic leader, give me a time and a date. When is your captivity going to be ended? Well, I submit to you, mine's ended. Got the documents to prove it. Say amen. Say amen to owe me or choke. It's still the truth. Now, this is the same story in Esther. The slaves knew that their exile was about over. And so, just like in our case today, in order for Persia to make the system more foolproof, listen, they don't want the slaves having this kind of information, and they don't want slaves set free. And so what they have to do is they have to create an artificial entity that's even more cunning and more foolproof than the previous one that sucked you into the trap, like your birth certificate, your driver's license, your Social Security, your marriage license, your voter registration, and I could go on and on. Are you listening? And so what they're doing, they have actually come up with the mechanism called artificial insemination, where they're inseminating the DNA of the enemy into the body and the mind of the host, those host slaves, and they are literally creating an entity that now is going to make their decisions willfully and choose to remain in bondage. Are you listening to me? Oh, I don't believe that. Oh, my goodness, I am so glad you feel that way. Because I have highlighted up here. Oh, that will never happen, you say. Well, all you have to do is look at how easily the former system has tricked you and hoodwinked you for multiplied generations. I'll give you a short list. Everybody today, when there's such a spotlight being focused on the racial division in this this country, and what they're wanting to do is to kind of pit the races against black against white, white and black against brown, and white and black and brown against yellow, and whatever the case may be. They're fomenting this dissent and this unrest, trying to cause a schism in between us and make you think that racism exists, and they want to point back to the 14th Amendment and remind you that the 14th Amendment was what freed what is referred to as African Americans. But all you have to do is go back and study the 14th Amendment, and you find that instead of abolishing slavery, it actually broadened slavery, and now you and I, as enemy combatants, we are all now slaves based on the fact that we stand in opposition to the state. Oh, I don't know if I believe that. Well, go back and just do yourself some research on presidential executive orders relating to the War Powers Act. Go back and ask yourself what's fixing to happen in the month of April when you set your clocks ahead 1 hour to daylight saving time. You know what daylight savings time actually is? It was actually called wartime. And it was established back in World War II to give a little more daylight at the end of the day for the war powers to continue their machine. Go back and research the origin of your birth certificates and then ask yourself if you're still in Babylon, Persia, or not. So having said all of this, it begs a question. And I want you to just think logically with me. And I'm not asserting that you've been thinking illogically, but the vast majority of us have been so confined to our traditional boxes that we have been thinking illogically. Okay? So if Israel is the sweat equity of Persia, that the sweat equity funds the economic machine, just like the slaves today. Listen to me, your sweat equity pays the machine. Why then would Haman want to kill off the golden egg that produces for Persia's economy? And fast forward ourselves to where we are today and ask yourself why. And some sources say upwards to 3 billion people have been killed in the last 3 years. Why would they want to kill off the goose that's laying the golden egg? Have you thought about that? Have you asked yourself, why would Haman want to kill off the source of all of their free labor? Have you ever asked that? Who replaces those slave sweat equity if their plans succeed? Well, you say, far-fetched. For generations and incorporation. You get the word corp from corpse, meaning a dead body, and oration, something that speaks from the dead, or fictitious entities, or an artificial intelligence has been created for every human. Go back and look in Black's Law Dictionary, humans referred to as a monster. According to the state, any court of law, you are considered a monster or a child. Either way, you're not fit to think for yourself, and so you have to pay somebody to go into a courtroom and speak on your behalf. That's an incorporation, one who speaks for the dead one. So stop back there and go back and look at Haman. If Haman is going to kill off the goose that's laying his golden egg, then is it possible that Haman presumed this Urim and Thummim as a device that had enough power that it could replace the workforce of Israel, or perhaps generate some sort of power or authority that would produce an income that would replace the multiplied tens of thousands of slaves that were going to be killed off? You got to ask yourself these questions. Why, if our sweat equity is what is fueling the economic machine of the world, why are the powers that be doing everything they can to make you sick where you can't work, to kill you off? Come on, think about this, and lose their funding. Ask yourself, have you stopped and just asked that? Why are these things happening? Did he presume the device as having a supernatural power? If so, someone or something would need to be created to take the place of those slaves and act on their behalf in order to siphon off what had been previously created from their labors. And so I conveniently gave you a clue. Indiana Jones and the Urim and Thummim. Pay attention now, because if you miss this, you're going to miss something very important. Now, I want to stipulate, during the time of our Messiah, Yeshua, on the earth, there was no legal, lawful, Torah-mandated priest system functioning according to the Aaronic lineage, because they had come in under the Roman authority. Annas and Caiaphas had purchased that place, that position. Are you hearing me? There was no Ark of the Covenant in the tabernacle or temple. There were no Urim and Thummim. If you go back and look at history, even Josephus in Antiquities chapter 3, 8, and 22 remarks that the Urim and Thummim had stopped working 200 years prior. Why? Because it was said that 200 years prior was when the last of the righteous high priest was in the order. The rest from that time forward had been corrupted during the Roman era. So, in my opinion, this kind of continues to expose the fallacious, counterfeit priestly system in Yeshua's day. Again, the temple had no ark, no menorah, or any other, listen to me, any other proper means of communication with Elohim, in particular without the Urim and Thummim. So, what does this say about the coming third temple, who will have none of those either, including a corrupt priestly system? So what power then did resonate in those original priestly vestments? What was the purpose of that? These kind of things, when you study the Torah and Abba begins to wave a flag in front of you, you need to stop whatever you're doing. And let me just stop here. I'm not talking about reading. I'm talking about study. Okay, there's a difference between reading and studying. If reading is all you do, you're missing out on what Abba has planned for you. You need to read a little. You need to study a lot. You need to take what you're reading and stop and break it down and see what it says in the original language. And when you do that, you begin to see the things that Father has hidden for you in the day that we're living in. Now, for starters, it's my opinion that Yahweh intended Israel to be a kingdom of priests. You cannot change that. Go back and look Numbers chapter 19, verse 6. The language there, where it says kingdom of priests, is derived from the word melech and Cohen. And I contend that his efforts, Yahweh's efforts, were directed in declaring Israel as a kingdom of, or nation of priests, was directed toward the restoration of the Melchizedek priestly order. Are you hearing me? Not the Levitical order. The Levitical order was set in place because of the golden calf incident and the direct disavowing, if you will, by the nation of Israel of Yahweh's plans for them as sons who would be kings and priests. And so as a result, from the very beginning, the garments of Aaron, listen to me carefully, the garments of Aaron were supposed to be a constant reminder of what the Adam had originally lost when he was in Eden. And as a constant reminder, pointing backwards to the Garden of Eden, they would also then point forward at the same time as that man was clothed with those garments. It would point forward to a period of time in the future when there would be a resurrection of the standing that had been intended for the house of Israel, where they were transformed from slaves coming out of Egypt into sons who were capable of being both kings and priests, and that was what was supposed to occur at Mount Sinai. You have the golden calf issue. Because of the golden calf issue, it did not negate the plan of Yahweh. It just set it aside for a season because he's dealing with carnal men. And when you're dealing with carnal men, sometimes you have to go through generations moving pieces of the puzzle or pieces of the chessboard so that you can get to where you can checkmate on the other end. Are you listening? Now, it doesn't change the fact that the original intent of the priestly garments pointed towards the coming of the Melchizedek, our king, priest, our Messiah, Yeshua, who would come as the last Adam. And those priestly garments also pointed towards listen to me, this is crazy. It pointed towards a rebirth, if you will, for all those who would then put on Messiah, put on his garments. And if you put on Yeshua, that's what we're told in the New Testament, put on Yeshua, then you put on his priestly garments. As I put on his garments, I'm putting on his nature. If I put on his garments in nature, I'm clothing myself with his power and with his authority. Where is that power and authority at now? I'm telling you, the enemy better tuck its tail and run, because the body of Messiah, the Melchizedek king and priestly order, is coming out of captivity, and they're coming out with power. Power. Oh, you're just flaunting that in front of people's faces, and you're probably going to get somebody calling you on the carpet. No, I'm just stating a fact. They can do with it whatever they want. It will not. Eliminate me, it doesn't change what Yahweh's word says. Listen to this, Exodus chapter 28. This is mind-staggering. You've read this a bunch of times. And Aaron shall bear the names of the children of Israel in the breastplate of judgment upon his heart when he goes into the holy place for a memorial before Yahweh continually. And you shall put in the breastplate of judgment the Urim and Thummim, and they shall be upon Aaron's heart when he goes in before Yahweh, and Aaron shall bear the judgment of the children of Israel upon his heart before Yahweh continually. Now, I don't have time to break this down because I have another place I want to go to, but most scholars assume that the only time Aaron as a high priest would communicate with Yahweh was inside the most holy place. But if you go back and look at the correct rendering of this, it's actually indicating that the Urim and Thummim probably served as a powering device that allowed Aaron, listen to me carefully, to communicate with Yahweh. And as he communicates with him, he's able to convey the substance of Yahweh's message to Israel, no matter where he was located, inside the tabernacle or not. That tells me that we don't have to have a standing third temple to have a relationship with Elohim, does it? I can have just as much a revelatory relationship with him here as I could if I'm standing in Jerusalem proper this afternoon. If what I presume is true, and that is that Haman used the Urim and Thummim, that it's our obligation and duty to find out why he was using them. And I wrote for you Proverbs 25:2. It's the glory of Yahweh to conceal a thing, but it's the honor of kings to search out a matter. If you're not considering yourself a king or a priest, then don't worry about it. You're not going to ever search this out anyway. Urim and Thummim. The first time you see it mentioned is in Exodus 28, verse 30. And it says, and thou shalt put in the breastplate of judgment, and I'm going to try and break this down a little bit plainer for you in a little bit, the Urim and Thummim. Now what we're about to do, we're going to do kind of an exercise in basic electronic engineering. And I don't have any physical expertise here, but I have spent the night at a Motel 6. Okay? I have, seriously, studied this extensively, and I have taken the liberty of condensing some information into some layman's terms, and hopefully it will help you to see what Yahweh is trying to reveal so that you'll begin to understand who you are. Turn to your neighbor and tell them, you really don't know who you are. And I'm just going to be honest with you, you really don't. If we really knew who we were, we would be outside changing things now. So let's look at this breastplate. In Hebrew, it's the word chosan. And it is called a sparkling pouch that's set upon the chest. And then it is in turn set upon an ephod. And the word ephod is described as a tunic or a mantle. And then finally, the Urim and Thummim was placed inside the chosan, inside that pouch, which rested upon the tunic or the mantle known as the ephod. Now it's interesting because the numeric value of that word chosan, which is that pouch, is 358. 358 is the Hebrew, is the numeric value of the Hebrew for the Hebrew word Mashiach, but also for the Hebrew word Nakash. And so it's interesting because you have to ask yourself, is it possible that the use of these garments could then be twisted and used as a means of enchantment, divining, or witchcraft by someone who might usurp its intention? Well, it's evident that this king of Persia and Haman thought so, and it's also quite evident that the priests of Yeshua's day felt the same thing because they had usurped power and authority, although they didn't have the Urim and Thummim. Let's move forward a little bit. Each of these particular garments that we just mentioned were made from twined linen, shesar, shesh. It's interesting because if you look at that word for shesh, linen, it's also the same word for the number 6. Remember, 6 is the numeric value of the number of man, Yeshua being the Vav man. And so what I want to do is stop there and look at this twined linen for a minute. If you understand anything about linen, linen has certain powerful properties. It's my opinion that these linen garments were there for a purpose, and that was to represent the original light garment that Adam and Chava would have been clothed in prior to their fall in Genesis chapter 3. Are you with me? They literally would have been entwined him. He would have put those on, just like our Messiah would. Go back and look at Psalm 104, verse 2, where it says, who covers yourself with light as with a garment. It's my opinion that these priestly garments that you see depicted here in our posture were actually worn as a rehearsal. Listen to me carefully. Every time the high priest put these garments on and stepped in front of Israel, it was done as a rehearsal to remind them that the purpose was pointing to the coming of the last Adam, who would then take them back to Eden. Okay? At the same time, the wearing of these garments and these instruments pointed to a future renaissance or a revival, during which time those found wearing the garments would be, at the same time of wearing them, be ushered into a season of unparalleled supernatural demonstrative power in Yahweh, and that would be known as the collective body of the Melchizedek priesthood, who would walk in the earth and shake the earth. And I got for you here in brackets, can you say Pentecostal experience? Once again, it's my opinion that everything I'm talking about, all of this rehearsal, was supposed to occur at Mount Sinai during the same time that there was a geothermal electromagnetic storm taking place on top of the mountain. And while that storm is going on, it's my opinion that the storm was supposed to energize everyone that was gathered at the base of the mountain and literally shroud them in a cloud or a garment, also known as cloven tongues of fire. That's mind-staggering. I'm going to prove to you what it says. The mountain, go back and read it, the mountain is actually described as quaking greatly. And if you break that down, you have Yecharad Meod, and I had to ask a question. Is it possible, and I want you to just think with me, because the children of Israel are gathered at the base of this mountain. And if you're gathered at the base of the mountain and the mountain's on top, the top of it's on fire, can I ask you a question? Where are you going to be looking? I wonder if anybody may have dropped a quarter here or something, man. You're going to be looking at the top of the mountain, are you not? Now, the reason you're going to be looking at the top of the mountain is because that's where stuff is happening. Are you hearing me? But is it possible that the mountain is actually serving as an antenna or a lightning rod, and the purpose of that is so that it can become a receiver? Something's transmitting power. The mountain's becoming like a lightning rod or receiver, and it's collecting power, and the sole purpose of it is so that it can discharge that power into the collective group of people surrounding the base of that mountain. Sounds like the book of Acts to me, doesn't it to you? The root of this word for shaking here is kara. Now I want you to remember, who was it on top of the mountain? We know that it was Moshe's 70 elders, but we also know that they went up there to the top of the mountain and they visibly saw the manifest presence of Yahweh. So he is the central focus of what was going on during those events on top of that mountain. Am I right? Now, when you read the root of that word for shaking, greatly shaking, the word harad indicates trembling or to quake, to shudder with fear, but it also, this is mind-staggering, it also hints at a person who's quaking or shaking because they're under powerful supernatural influence, and it's demonstrated by a powerful, violent, vibrational shaking. I believe that the living creator of the earth, the manifest presence, also known as Messiah Yeshua, Yod-He, Vav-He, stepped his foot out on the top of that mountain, and there is a supernatural vibrational power resonating in him and out of him. He has on the priestly garments. He has the original breastplate of Eden on him, which the priestly garments were patterned after, and that whole thing is shaking. He is vibrating. Are you listening to me? The word for meod, shaking greatly, is this mind-shaking. It's usually indicating very, to emphasize how, emphasize much, power, enhance, something that's enhanced. But it's interesting because it actually comes from a really interesting little word. It's the word ood. And this word ood means firebrands or literal coals of living fire that have been raked together. Are you hearing me? Now, the first time you see this root of the word ood is in Genesis chapter 2, where it says that it actually says a mist watered the garden, right? And in your mind, you're just thinking of how steam rises up from the earth, and it was that steam sort of like you would have in a greenhouse, and it's a mist that waters the earth. But if you go back and look at it in the Hebrew language, it actually carries with it the idea of fire being the mist rather than water. And it says this fiery mist, this ed, watered shakah, to water or to refresh or restore the Adamah. The root of this word for watered here, shakah, comes from a sheen kuf root that means sackcloth. And this root indicates a rough linen light garment that was clearly seen all the way back in Eden as being the source of a refreshing by fire. And so this Adamah, or the source of Adam's creation, is a source that is constantly revitalizing by vibrational frequencies through a fiery garment upon the one who would put that garment on. Now, Adam has a body before he has a body formed by the hand of Yahweh. Are you listening to me? And so what you're literally seeing is this man, Adam, this first Adam, is literally a living, moving fire. If you look at the word ish in Hebrew, it comes from the same root as the word ish for fire. He was literally a flame of fire walking up and down in the Garden of Eden. At Sinai, during the Festival of Shavuot, known also as Pentecost, it seems to me that the same Edenic cloven tongues of fire that were seen crashing down the mountain, they also were forming a literal fiery mantle whose intention was that of encompassing those that were gathered around the base of that mountain in a Melchizedek priestly garment. At the same time, they would then resurrect a dead body called the house of Israel and transform them into kings and priests as soon as they put that on. And then they could begin to step out, and the waters would have parted. The rocks would have burst open. I'm telling you, Yahweh has plans for His body in the days ahead. Linen fabric has a vibrational frequency of 5,000 megahertz. This is mind-staggering. It's interesting because wool is the only other fabric that also has a vibrational frequency of 5,000. You're not to mix wool and linen. Why? Because when you mix them together, they cancel one another out, and you lose the benefit of the vibrational frequency. Linen material reflects light, and as a result, if it reflects it, it also has the ability to amplify vibrational frequencies. Now, if you're having a problem with me talking about vibrational frequency, everything in your life today as we speak, as far as electronics are concerned, are based on crystalline vibrational frequencies. Your body is a crystalline organism, and your body is literally designed to vibrate. You are an electrical conduit. You are a transmitter and a receiver. And so linen materials that makes up this linen garment would amplify the vibrational frequencies of every highlighted letter upon the breastplate, in addition to the light that was released by the Urim and the Thummim. How many of you remember when on top of the mountain the voice kept getting louder and louder and louder? Why? It's being amplified. It is a proven fact that fire amplifies sound. It was discovered back in the days when they used to have these large outdoor, what do you call it when you go to hear people, these bands play? Say it again. Yeah, when they would have these large, thousands and thousands of people would come like Woodstock. They would come in these places, and they found out in order to amplify the sound where everybody could hear it, they would actually create large standing columns of fire with butane or propane or whatever, and then blast the sound through the fire, and that would literally amplify the sound. Now you know why there was a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud in the wilderness. All Egypt could hear was the multiplied tens of thousands of angelic hosts whose words were being spoken at the unction of Yahweh, amplified through that fire. I would have stood back there terrified. It's also interesting because gold is used in the process of weaving the priestly garments, and that ancient process would take linen thread and twine three different thread together, and then take a gold filigree thread and wind it around that and actually produce a golden yarn. And most of us, we don't even stop to ask questions here. We just look at it and go on because, details are details, and I don't want to get bogged down here, right? That's not true. Everything matters. If you notice, I'm standing up here barefoot this afternoon. Why? The high priest was commanded when he went into the presence of Yahweh to be unshod or barefoot. Why? He has on a garment that is so supercharged with power that he has to be grounded. If he's not grounded, he'd be lit up. And if I'm properly grounded, guess what? I have then the ability to effectively hear better. And if I can hear better, if I'm hearing, that means I'm a receiver. But if all you ever do is receive and turn, let me just tell you this, that's all a lot of us do is we receive, we never transmit. It's time we begin to learn how to transmit what we've been receiving and see the power of Yahweh affect people's lives. Now, in addition to the outer garments, they also had undergarments that were also made with the same linen. And it had the gold shielding in it. The ephod and the sash would wind around the body several times, and it clearly formed what was known as today a loop antenna. And you say, oh my gosh, man, that's just far-fetched. The U.S. military has been using body wearable antennas woven into their uniforms for quite some time. And I don't know if you remember, but more than 2 years ago, we were talking about 5G technology. And I told you then, if we're hearing about it now, it's antiquated, and 6G is already here. I have for you something here that you can go back and look at a little bit later. But it basically says that human beings are being used as part of an electromagnetic radiation antenna system. And you think the enemy doesn't know what's about to happen. Let's get back to these Urim and Thummim. The Urim and Thummim are two crystalline stones along with the breastplate, 12 breastplate stones. I believe that they would have been in a circular pattern. The reason for that is because electricity travels in a circuit. Are you with me? Travels in a circle. Now, you also had the two stones atop the shoulder pieces with the name of the 12 tribes upon it as well. Each one of those would have been surrounded by the same twisted gold fibers or filigree like that twined linen we were talking about. Gold is the most conductive and least tarnishable of all metals, far better than that copper that I just gave you that website about earlier. And so what you have now, when you look at what's being designed by this priestly garment, is that you have a prototype of a superconducting radio computer capable of receiving and transmitting information from the Creator. And it's my opinion, and you can poo-poo this if you want, but I believe with everything in me, it's my opinion that this same device that Aaron wore could have also opened up portals into which he could have stepped into the presence of Yahweh or have been transported to other locations at the will of Yahweh. Adam did. Adam was not limited by the physical flesh. And again, I know you don't want to believe that, but Moshe was translated, Elijah was translated, Yeshua was translated, and so was Philip the evangelist. And I believe that there's going to be some of us in the days ahead that you'll be here and Yahweh will say, I need you to go to Ghana, West Africa. And there you are. There will be some of you that may be standing here one day and hear a prophetic word from Yahweh, and there is a Senate, House convention going on, right in the middle of probably the address to the nation by the president, and you step in the middle of that. And they wonder what happened, and how did you get there? And they're trying to get security to come and get you, and they cannot move. They're locked in place, and you're declaring, "Thus saith Yahweh." These things are about to happen. Now, regarding what I just said, most people don't understand because they've never seen some of the older model radios. But if you know anything about the older radios, you know that you had AM and FM channels, AM and FM signals. And what happens is that a radio signal is transmitted and it's an unintelligible sound. You can't really make sense of it. But if you have an amplitude modulation occurring, it takes those same radio signals and enables an audio wave to pass through crystals or stones, and it amplifies the signal through that filigreed gold and silver or linen. And what it does then is it gives you an audible, understandable word and message, and there's no need for an external power source. It becomes its own power source and its own antenna. Well, should we move the tent today, Moshe? Well, let's go. Let me just get this out here and shake this around. Oh, cast these lots. Whoop. He said no. Stick it back. Come back tomorrow. Should we move the tent today? Make sure to shake these lots. Poop. Oh, man, comes up snake eyes this time. Wait, that was what I was playing last night. It was not that simple. I'm telling you, Yahweh gave them precise, powerful instructions. Now, if you remember the nature of those 12 stones, the 2 stones on the shoulder, the Urim and Thummim, they overlaid the priest's body. That body is inherently crystal, and upon receiving and transmitting a signal, the entire collections of stones upon that breastplate would have begun to vibrate and move accordingly. And yes, there are historical witnesses to such. And the underlying linen garments with their gold thread forming a loop antenna, in my opinion, they would have brilliantly exploded into fire. You would have been able to see the fire. How many of you have seen any of Tesla's work when you just touch it and you see the fire inside of it? I believe that that's akin to what would have been seen when the high priest had those garments on and was receiving or transmitting a word from Yahweh. He would have literally been a man on fire. He would have literally, and this is what the sages tell us, not the sages, this is what some of these extra biblical texts tell us, in particular the Qumran text. Go back and look at it. I have these up there for you. They refer to them as tongues of fire that would emanate forth from him and upon him and be within him. He would literally be clothed with tongues of fire. My goodness. It's my opinion that when the manifest presence of Yahweh stood upon Mount Sinai, when you see the lightning, it was talking about the lightning and the thunders and the voice, when that would be emanating from that original breastplate upon his body, the same breastplate that he would have worn walking in Eden, that's what shook the entire mountain and exploded down the sides of the mountain in a fiery burst of creational power, and it would have been revealed in incremental Hebrew letters as tongues of fire. Look at the words Urim and Thummim. And you can see I have highlighted here and embossed for you Aleph and Tav. The collected sum of those letters, listen to me, the collective sum of those letters exploding down that mountainside, in my opinion, would have literally formed the body of Messiah, waiting for the children of Israel. It's coming down the mountain, and you're standing there as an individual, and all you have to do is step into it and catch it and clothe yourself with it. Glory to Yah. That's what he's talking about. Putting on Yeshua. It's my opinion, right now as we speak, the vast majority of people I know have absolutely no clue regarding their DNA, and being able to trace it back to any sort of one of the 12 houses of Israel. You have some that say, oh yeah, we can trace this back, and I'm a Cohen, I'm part of the house of Levi, I'm Sephardic, I'm cathartic, or whatever you want to call it, and I'm just being facetious here. My point being is that I'm convinced the only way you can know what particular tribal affiliation you have is because those letters that were one time spoken off the top of Mount Sinai, it said it was for the generation there and for future generations. I believe you were disseminated into the nations and sent there to preserve and protect that DNA. And I believe that you have coded in you, the reason that you're hearing the things you're hearing now, you have coded in you part of the DNA of Yahweh. And if that's the case, that each one of us, as we come collectively together, the forms of these individual letters are going to be gathered together again. As the outcasts step out from Babylon, we're going to form the man, the manifest presence of Yahweh in the earth. Now, I have something for you here before you get all Pentecostal. And I want to stipulate something. Don't go off and tell people that I said that I'm against speaking in tongues. I am not. I am all for speaking in tongues according to the Torah. I am not for what is practiced by probably 99% of those that call themselves Pentecostal tongue talkers. And the reason for that is that the vast majority of it is motivated by the carnal flesh. And that's enough of that. What is it that I was trying to show us? I believe you're about to see why King Ahasuerus and Haman thought that they would be able to use these vessels and these garments. Are y'all getting anything out of this? Let's look at the tabernacle, man. And for years, our position has been that the tabernacle was designed in the form of the man, specifically the high priest. And the high priest was the foremost example of how the original Adam should have functioned in the earth. Only Adam would have operated in the Melchizedek order, not the Levitical order. The Levitical order was instituted because of a corrupt system. Thank you. Bring a water in the name of a prophet, receive a prophet's reward. That Melchizedek priestly order would serve as a means by which the Adam could literally, listen to me, could literally represent Elohim in the earth. If you put on the garment that Adam had on, you would then be an ambassador of Yahweh. And whatever you said on behalf of Yahweh, and your word goes. You could then say, so let it be said, so let it be written. Okay? And again, in order to understand that, you have to revert back to our earlier discussion regarding the Hebrew letter Pei. And remember that Elohim, like Elohim, Adam would have breathed out. He would have literally spoken light. And if we could go back to the Garden of Eden and slow down what Adam was saying, sound is light slowed down. And you could literally see with your eyes the light that would be coming out of Adam's mouth. I'm convinced that you would have been watching him breathing out and speaking the same way that you hear the sages describing what was going on at Mount Sinai. You would have literally seen flaming Hebrew letters cascading down the mountain or coming out of the mouth of the Adam, and it would have uprooted mountains. It would have broke stones, uprooted trees. It would have caused those that were pregnant to birth at that time. And everything that you see there at Mount Sinai, emanating out of that burning mountaintop, would have been there to commemorate the Shavuot Moed, which we've discussed it, you find described in Acts chapter 2, verse 3, where you see 120 gathered in what's commonly referred to as the upper room, and all of a sudden there falls on them cloven tongues as fire. But wait a second. There's not one described word regarding the Urim and Thummim mentioned there in the book of Acts. So what was actually happening? What was it? There has to be some sort of a connection. Now, I believe that the individual that wrote the book of Acts knew this connection to the cloven tongues of fire and some sort of priestly garment. Or he would not have used the same analogy that you find being used in a lot of extra biblical works. And so what you find is that they were cloaked in a garment of light like Adam was able to access. And the garment of light that allowed Adam to access the presence of Yahweh and his throne allowed him not only to communicate with him, but also allowed Adam to relay information to the rest of creation. How many of you have friends that want to know what is going on? I can't hear. I'm not hearing. I have no clue. Wait just a second. I got these two stones in my pocket. One says yes and no. Oh, cast them over there. Dude, you got to know again. And I'm kind of an innovative individual, and when tithes and offerings was a little short this week, if you increase your tithe, you'll probably get a yes. Are you hearing me? Adam was not limited to the physical world, and I believe he could have thought of relocating and have been there. I'm convinced that the high priest, Aaron, had the same ability. Again, I don't know if I believe that, but there are records of individuals. Elijah, when there was a messenger sent to Elijah, and he called fire down on companies of soldiers. Finally, Obadiah was sent to him, and he said, wait a second. Are you really going to be here, or are you going to be like you've been in the past and be gone? Yeshua was translated. They were attempting to throw him off the top of the mountain. It says he just disappeared, walked back through them. Philip the evangelist had the greatest revival in the New Testament, and all of a sudden, poof, he's translated and stands in front of an Ethiopian eunuch to interpret Torah for him. I'm telling you, Yahweh's about to clothe his people with the ability to step through the portals of time and affect change in wherever he sends you. Now, after the fall, the vehicle called the body of Adam changed with the death of this flesh. And after that, there was a different garment that would have to be established because the first one no longer had a power source. Adam no longer was clothed in light. I contend that the subsequent power source was none other than the Aleph and Tav, the Urim and Thummim, lights and perfection of the creation language known as Hebrew. And I'm convinced that that's why the language was protected from Adam's time, extricated out of the garden. The house of Shem protected it, Noah protected it, Abraham protected it, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and I believe it was held until right now in the season of this Torah portion. It was hidden and protected until Yeshua arrived on the scene. And now it's being restored. Now, it seems to me that what we're witnessing in this particular study is an attempt by the enemy, Persia and Haman, to take advantage of this power of creation language, Hebrew. Remember Genesis chapter 11, the Tower of Babel incident? Go back and look at that. What were they doing? They had gathered together and they were generating power. And Yahweh comes down, and what does he do? He confounds the language. Let me just share this with you. I'm convinced that the very same thing happens in the book of Esther with Haman. I believe that Yahweh himself comes down and intervenes to confound the tongue so that Haman cannot properly use the language of creation. And if that's the case, how in the world was he able to accomplish that? You got to go back and look. I've shared with you before that I believe that Daniel and Ezra and Esther and Nehemiah and Zechariah were all contemporary. They lived during the same time. You need to remember that Israel had been in Babylonian captivity. Everybody remember that. At the writing of the book of Esther, and with Haman, Ahasuerus, and the study of Purim, they're in Persian captivity, right? How many of you remember that Daniel prophesies? There's a handwriting on the wall, and Daniel interprets that for Belteshazzar, and he tells them what's going to happen. Babylon's going to fall, Persia's coming. How many of you remember that? So Daniel saw the Babylonian captivity and subsequently the Persian captivity. And it's my opinion that he was given insight regarding the intention of Persia and Haman, and that they were going to try and usurp the language of creation, Hebrew. He was shown that shortly before Persia came in and battled with Babylon and conquered Babylon. Now, he was told to seal up the books, to seal up the languages and seal up the tongues until such time as you would find referred to as the time of the end. Zephaniah 3:9 says, in the last days, the time of the end, that there would be a pure language released. Am I right? Daniel chapter 10, verse 13 tells us that the prince of Persia, go figure this, there's a spiritual principality and power that's working behind the scenes. Haman is the physical analogy of it, but there's a principality and power that's moving behind the scenes, and his purpose is to destroy the house of Israel and to use the language of creation as the mechanism for that. Are you hearing me? He withstands Daniel for 21 days. Daniel says in his own words that my cogitations made me sick. He was literally physically sick because of what he was seeing, and he did not understand. For 21 days, Daniel fasted. Finally, Gabriel is sent with an answer. And in Daniel chapter 12, verse 4, he is instructed to shut up the words and seal the books even until the time of the end, right? The word for shut there is the word satam, and it means to keep something secret. And you can keep it secret by repairing it, stopping it up, obstructing it. In other words, I can tell you, instead of telling you the truth, I can mix a lie with part of that truth, and I have, what have I done? I've just repaired it, I've just obstructed it, and I have sealed it up to where you really can't see the truth. There's a lot of individuals today that claim they're teaching the truth from these sacred platforms, but they have some lies twisted in it, and so what they've done, they have sealed up the truth. The truth mixed with a lie is still a lie. A lie mixed with truth is still a lie. Are you hearing me? Okay? The word for seal there is the word khatam, and it means to affix a seal and to lock it up. Now, pay attention. Did you happen to notice the two-letter root stem that was common to both of them, the tav mem, same root of the word thumim, urim, and thummim? Well, when you look at this root, it's connected with tam, which is a requisite for a sacrifice. A sacrifice has to be unblemished. Am I right? Remember that. Okay, well, the root of this word tam indicates something that's unblemished, without fault, indicating an original, pure, created condition. Now, based on the word for seal there, it's indicating what was original and impure now must be obstructed and remedied, with the original having a seal affixed to it and locked up until a time specified for its future unveiling. Did that make sense to you? And basically what it's telling us is that the language that Daniel's told to seal up, the language now has a different fleshly body. Who was the Word? Who was the language? Yeshua. So we're talking about the original, the Lamb slain before the foundation of the world. He was the original Aleph and Tav. He was the original language. And so what Yahweh had to do, Yahweh had to take that original Lamb and give it a modified body and hide something in that body until the time of the end, where the rest of the world could not see what that Lamb really was. So the language, the Hebrew letters that Daniel's sealing up, has a different fleshly body rather than the former body of light. And what you have here is a revelation of the word of fire and truth, the Aleph and Tav, who would be given a fleshly body that would be foreign and hidden to most. In fact, what was happening with the Aleph and Tav was the same thing that happened to Yeshua. He was sealed up until the coming of his day, and very few people at Yeshua's day recognized who he was, and he was hidden and foreign to most. You see that? It's a prophetic picture of an animal sacrificial sacrificial system. That sacrificial system was a corruption of the pure lamb's body until such time as the seal that had been affixed to his body, called the Levitical sacrifice system, could be broken off, and you could see him step out into the gateways of heaven and be recognized as the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. To this day, all you have to do is go back and look. The word says to this day that veil remains on the vast majority of the house of Israel, Judah, the rest of the world. Can you say amen? It's not an accident that the words Urim and Thummim begin with the letters Aleph and Tav, and it gives us a unique word that's found in Genesis chapter 1:1, the et, and it's called a direct object marker, and it's connected to the breathing out of creation. And Yeshua refers to himself as the Aleph and Tav, the Alpha and Omega in the Septuagint. And nobody argues that when they see him making the statement about the Alpha and Omega, nobody argues that it is actually meant to say Aleph and Tav. They just will argue whether or not he was actually the Aleph and Tav, okay? And so what happens is that Daniel is the individual that helped to complete this hiding of Yeshua. Daniel is the one that helped to put a veil over the eyes of the people so that when Yeshua stepped out into the world, he would not be recognized until the day that we're living in now. In just a short time in front of us, it says every eye is going to see him. The veil is going to be removed. Come on. You need to be able to see. Being able to see is powerful because there are 7 Hebrew words in Genesis 1:1 with the Aleph and Tav being right in the middle. The Aleph and Tav is the 4th branch of the Shamash. The Aleph and Tav is the servant candle, and it's the servant candle who has the fire, and it's the servant candle that lights all of the others. And so if you begin to look at it and look closer at Urim, which is translated as lights by most people, it comes from the same root, ur, which, as we've shown, could indicate fire. And the counterpart of Urim, Thummim, connotes that which is complete, whole, entire, without blemish, and its root indicates something complete and finished, brought to an end. And when you put the two together, listen to this. You have a fire that restores, bringing wholeness, perfection, and restoration. And it's speaking of the resurrection power of Yahweh's word. You will be thrown into the furnace. Some by water, some by flood. All of you going to go through the blood, the fire. The blood was intended to be light and fire. From the fall, Adam's flesh no longer resonated with this power. And so Yahweh put a living, powerful prophecy in front of the children of Israel in anticipating the coming of the last Adam, Yeshua. The one that would come in the flesh without corruption, but he would come in a temporary vessel, and a temporary vessel would have to be instituted and suffice until such time as the genuine article arrived. Listen to me. What happens with Daniel is that this is mind-staggering. The letters and books that were sealed by Daniel would take on a skin, tent, or garment, just like the fleshly tent in the wilderness, until a perfected word or tongue arrived that could be put on a Melchizedek priest by faith, just like we're admonished to put on Messiah. Go back and read Romans 13, verse 14. And what Daniel did was effectively hide the original vessel word until such time as he was crucified. And even then he was rejected by his own until such time in the near future when every eye is going to see him. Listen to me. The veil is going to be removed from all men's eyes. But I have a word for you. There has always been a remnant who was able to see him in advance. And you're going to see him before the rest of the world does. And as a result of seeing, listen to me, because if you cannot see him, you're not coming out of Babylon. If you're able to see him, you're going to come out. You're going to come out of Babylon. And this is the rehearsal that's found in the Levitical priesthood and the garments and the Urim and Thummim. The function of the garments being the same, to allow access to Yahweh and the lost source of power, the Urim and Thummim, the Aleph and Tav. This power source temporarily restored to a great degree the flesh of the dead Adam, the house of Israel. And it's my opinion that, listen to me, 40 years without clothes wearing out or shoes wearing out or no sick or feeble among them came only as a result of the demonstration of this power. And for additional confirmation, as we reviewed earlier, go back and look at some of these extra biblical texts from the Qumran era. You find that the manifestation of the Urim and Thummim during those days was said, listen to this, to be relegated to or specifically for. The only one who could manifest the tongues of fire through the Urim and Thummim was one referred to as the anointed priest. Well, the word for anointed here is Mashiach, indicating that the Qumran community were waiting for listen to this, they were waiting for a messianic priestly figure. In fact, a preponderance of their writings reveal an expectation of this anointed priest who would be both priest and king, typifying the role of the ancient Melchizedek. That's powerful. That's powerful. And I'm convinced that our Messiah spent lots of his time in the Qumran community. Let's look at the Urim and Thummim. Can y'all hold on? I've got about 9 slides and 8 minutes to get there. We got a short time to get there. Can y'all hold on? It's my opinion that several things must and will happen simultaneously at the proper moment necessary to release the captives from Babylon, Persia, that's mentioned in Revelation 18:4, who are seen as coming out of her. Those things are Zephaniah 3:9, the restoration of the pure language, that has happened. The restoration of the Melchizedek priesthood. Out of all that we're going to discuss, this is probably the most fought against. And it's being fought against by the Levitical order. And if you go back and look at what's happening there with the restoration of the third temple and all that, you can see why. It's because it gets into pockets. These kind of pockets. Are you hearing me? Next, I believe you're going to see the appearing of the Urim and Thummim in conjunction with the gathering of the exiles. And I believe that this is patterned after what we're witnessing in our study of Esther. Now, as we mentioned earlier, Esther would have been contemporary with Daniel, Nehemiah, and Ezra the scribe. Go back and look at Ezra chapter 2, verses 62 to 63. And it describes a group of individuals that are returning out of Babylonian captivity. This is mind-staggering. Listen to this, because this fits you. You're called a king and a priest. But when you appear before your brothers, you've been exiled. You can't prove your lineage, just like there in Ezra, and it says that because they could not determine their lineage, it didn't say that they were not fit for consideration. It's just that they were exiled for a period of time because they couldn't prove it. So what do? The governor at that time, Tetzaveh, commands that the Urim and Thummim be brought forth for the purpose of establishing their identity and their standing as priestly candidates. I'm telling you that if we're expected to come out of Babylon and fulfill the figure of the priestly Melchizedek order, the Urim and Thummim is going to have to be restored and consulted to prove your DNA and your identity. And I'm telling you, it's here. It's here. How can you tell your tribal affiliation? There will be proper validation shortly, as I'm expecting this exact same scenario to take place in our future. And it seems a bit of trouble for a lot of those who espouse the current DNA test as the determining factor for their Aaronic Levitical priestly lineage. There are some other clues in our study of Esther and the future Haman. Haman was an anti-Messiah figure, and he's going to once again attempt to stop what the house of Israel is doing. Now I want you, and I have in bold letters there, stop. I want you to remember that there are many encompassed in this last group that say that they are part of the house of Israel. Revelation 2:9 and 3:9 says that they say that they are Jews and are not. They claim Jewish lineage, and by virtue of claiming Jewish lineage, they can then turn around and say we also have the ability to be connected to the Levitical order. And I'm telling you that the enemy knows whose are his. And so, listen to me. The battle is not going to be launched against them. It's going to be launched against the house of Israel, the true house of Israel. Why would I attack my own unless my own have lost their use to me? And so they will be useful until a season. And when he's through with them, he'll shake them like a dog and throw them down. Okay? You and I are going to see a return of Gog, of which Haman was an archetype. And this is known as a euphemism, Gog and Magog, Magog being the place of his origin. It's a euphemism of the anti-Messiah in the near future, just as he's shown in Esther. He is shown to us in Esther. You want to ask where? Esther chapter 3, verse 1. Haman is introduced as the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, or Agagite. And he's referred to as a prince or the prince underneath Ahasuerus the king. In other words, he is a little prince, which is another title of the coming anti-Messiah. And there are a lot of scholars in the world that equate the word Agag here, or Agag, with Magog, the son of Japheth, seen in Genesis chapter 10, verse 2. In fact, there are many that translate this Agag as Gogite. Go back and look in Numbers chapter 24, verse 7, and look at the Septuagint and the Samaritan versions, because both versions, not virgins, versions, that's what happens when you see you got a little bit of time and a long way to go. Both of those versions read Gog. Some scholars even doubt that Haman descended from Amalek, the grandson of Esau, and if that's true, then what we just shared lends credence to that. And it's also worth mentioning that the name Haman, He Mem Nun, also give us the word Hinnom, as in the valley of Hinnom. Isn't that interesting? Also known as Gehenna, the place figuratively known as Hades or hell. And here I am making this prophetic declaration. There are those of you who are going to see the Urim and Thummim restored, and you will reside in Goshen. While those who are manipulated by the perversion of their DNA into becoming an artificial intelligence will be ushered into a Gehenna by a future Haman. Now, it's apparent that Haman felt he could use the latent power of the Hebrew language to destroy Esther and her people. As we speak, the language of Babylon, Persia is embedded in every facet of our life, and each one of you are bombarded with EMF technology, the likes of which have not been seen since the Urim and Thummim were active in the earth. Towers, wires, Wi-Fi, smart devices, body implants that rewrite human DNA and much more are all the efforts of the enemy who have directed the same plans as that of the original Haman, and their thought is to create a new world order. The power of words to change DNA is undeniable. Haman felt that he could eliminate the Shemite nation who had been entrusted with the fiery tongue of creation, just as the powers that be are attempting to use a corruptive language to alter the remnant seed of Yahweh today. Here's the catch. Like Esther, you and I have been secretly hidden among the nations for just such a time as this. What is your purpose? Your purpose is to thwart the plans and schemes of Haman and watch as the outcasts are being gathered. And as we speak, there is a renewed and amplified modulation being restored to the collective body of the Melchizedek Messiah. A mark or seal of Yahweh, the Aleph and Tav, the Urim and Thummim, will open the minds and hearts of the house of Israel. And as we put on him, your ability to receive and transmit his word like cloven tongues of fire will result in a remnant priesthood clothed in garments of righteousness. You are going to see his power demonstrated as it reverberates down the mountains. And here the mountains is figurative of the seat of powers in the earth. And it's going, listen to this carefully, it's going to enable those who hear and disable those who won't. And it's my opinion that Daniel was shown this in Haman as the future anti-Messiah. And he remarks in Daniel chapter 11, verse 32, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries, but the people that do know their Elohim shall be strong and do great exploits. I wanted to call your attention, one last thing, to the word for flatteries. In Hebrew, it's Strong's number 2514, halakha, flattery. It comes from a root that means to divide, plunder, and separate, but it also sounds very similar to the Talmudic halakha. Halakha, halakha, the way. You be careful. Haman is alive and he's well. And I have for you a couple of other links that'll help you if you want to look. I hope you've enjoyed this teaching. I hope that Yahweh is speaking to you like he has been speaking to us, because your Goshen is there for you. All you have to do is access it. Say amen. Shabbat